Theater, jazz, celebrity, race, and power. DC's U Street was once the heart and soul of African-American business and culture in Washington. It was a city within a city, a mecca where black celebrities jammed and scattered, and black-owned businesses once thrived in the nation's capital. Today, a stroll back in time to the community once known as the Black Broadway. Washington Full Circle starts right now.
Black entrepreneurs started opening up black clubs all over the neighborhood, and oh, were they ever jumping. The 1920s to 1950s were the greatest musical eras in Washington, D.C.'s history, and it all happened right here on and about U Street.
Welcome to Washington Full Circle. I'm Furman Patterson. A highly educated black middle class was the force behind the powerful and dazzling history of DC's Black Broadway. The story is brought to the screen by Emmy Award-winning producer Shalay Haynesworth. Shalay, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you for the opportunity to stop by.
What a wonderful project. It's fantastic to watch. I've watched all of the segments of it. And first of all, I want to say, what led you to kick off this project?
Well, I'm a third-generation Washingtonian, and essentially I grew up largely being influenced by this community. You know, a lot of the elders that landed in D.C. or some that actually were here already, I grew up with them, particularly my family, you know.
Right.
And so a few years ago, I was driving down U Street with my grandmother, who arrived in the U Street community in July of 1932.
Wow.
And she said, wow, where are we? I said, this is the U Street community. She said, no way. And so at that moment, I said, wow, I've got to start documenting these elders and the voices who still remain, that can give us the authentic history and story about the Black Broadway.
Now, that phrase, Black Broadway, came from Pearl Bailey.
Pearl.
Tell us about that angle.
And that's a good, everyone, I would love to have had an opportunity to interview Pearl Bailey, because I've looked everywhere. So we don't really have a sense of when Pearl Bailey coined the U Street as Black Broadway,
Mm-hmm.
but we do know that she was born in 1918, and you know, based on history and what she shared as well in her book, The Raw Pearl, she jump-started her career on U Street at about the age of 15.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking this phrase, she coined it in the early 30s, sort of as a play on Broadway, because at the time, which essentially hasn't really changed today,
mm-hmm.
African Americans weren't really being featured on the Broadway in New York.
Right. Now, you see in this documentary, you see dazzling images of celebrities, jazz, movie stars, and people very well dressed. So this corridor was thriving, but this was during the Jim Crow era. How did that even happen?
Well, and so essentially the community was anchored by Howard University. So we know that after the Civil War and you had the post-bellum eras, it was about uplifting the race through education. So a lot of people migrated. We had the various migration movements, and so they landed in the U Street community to attend Howard University.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're talking, again, the whole thrust was to uplift the race through education. And so people came, they attended Howard University. We also had the premier African-American high school in DC at the time, M Street School, which is now Dunbar.
Right.
And so these individuals came to DC or were already here, got these amazing educations, and discovered that they couldn't get a job, Mm-hmm. So essentially what they did was they created their own way, sort of like what was going on in Oklahoma on the Black Wall Street.
Right.
And so you had doctors, lawyers, pharmacists. They started their own businesses. And then the educators already, as I said, they were teaching at M Street School. You had people like Carter G. Woodson, in fact, Mary Church Terrell, Anna J. Cooper, who was considered one of the top African American scholars of all time. They were all in this community, you know, and so that is what molded and shaped the business community, the club scene, and then of course you had the Howard Theater, which actually opened in 1910 and was the first colored-run theater in America, which is an amazing accomplishment.
Now, outside of the Washingtonians here that knew about this so-called Black Broadway, was it known throughout the country as this Mecca?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was known as, you know, the cultural Mecca, because essentially at the time, and still, D.C. was the power capital. It was the epicenter of politics and power in the United States and the world at large. And so everyone, if you wanted to impact the change in the country, you had to be based here. And they lived in this community, particularly African Americans. So you had Mary McLeod Bethune, the Black Cabinet. She's in this community, you know, protesting what's taking, you know, the segregation that existed in D.C. And so that was the other thing. D.C. was very segregated, and so a lot of our, you know, the community people, when they landed here, they had no idea that D.C. was just as segregated as it was where they potentially left. In the case, my family came here from Louisiana, and they discovered that, wow, D.C. is just as segregated as Louisiana is, you know.
How large was your family first coming in?
So my grandmother came in July 1932, but her older brother was already living here. And she came here with her parents, and they moved to 9th and Westminster Street, which is blocks away from the Howard Theater.
Hold on to that thought. There's so much to talk about the
Yeah.
Black Broadway. More on the D.C. community once seen as a cultural and intellectual hub of Black America. A look back at Black Broadway and you when Washington Full Circle returns.
This was the thriving community of the African American Society, and business-wise as well. My first job was at Industrial Bank of Washington, the only minority bank in the city at that time. After having been employed there for a very short time, you realize the importance of U Street, what we called our Black Broadway.
Welcome back to Washington Full Circle. Emmy Award-winning producer Shalay Hainsworth is taking viewers on a stroll down memory lane as she celebrates the legacy of U Street in her documentary Black Broadway on You. So we saw Virginia from Ben's Chili Bowl, which has been around for ages.
Since 1958.
Isn't that amazing?
It's an amazing feat.
So she's seen a lot of the things in the city. But along U Street right now, there's still Ben's Chili Bowl. There's a Lincoln Theater, the Howard, restored Howard. But how much of those places are still left on U Street?
Well, the 11th and U is still very much a prominent corner for African American businesses and the history of Black Broadway. You have Bohemian Caverns, which opened in 1926. That's still there. Industrial Bank.
Yeah, but it was called Crystal
It went through
Caverns
several names. It was
okay.
called Crystal Caverns.
Right.
And then it was called the Caverns,
Right.
and then Bohemia, and then, you know, a multitude of names, but it's still there.
It adapted.
And it's still the same structure. It looks just the way it did back then.
Right.
And then you have on the other corner Lee's Card and Flower Shop, which opened up in 1945, and then you have
family owned, right?
It's still family owned,
Yeah.
the Lee family, and then you have Industrial Bank, which opened up in August 20th, 1934, which in the heart of the Great Depression, which again is an amazing accomplishment. And so you still have that. You still have True Reformer building. Unfortunately, it's no longer ran by us, you know, and people don't know that that was actually the first building in America that was built and designed by Black, you know, African Americans and Black architect John Langford.
So much history along
Yes,
U Street.
and I wanted to add that the project is really, it's multi-platform. And so it's not just a documentary, because we're in this digital age, and so the website is serving what I call the living digital history book or virtual museum. So right now I'm using a lot of the interview footage to produce documentary shorts that live on the website as well.
Now, that's one thing. How are you getting this information, the video out, besides the internet platform? I understand that sometimes there's talk sessions with the.
Oh yeah,
with the
so
video.
so part of what I've been doing is again, it's multi-platform. So what I've been doing is inviting in local artists, and I'm transforming them back into some of our pioneers, like Pearl Bailey, for example, to tell the story. And then we have performances where I have different artists, people from today pop in and they impersonate Pearl Bailey, Sarah Vaughan, and they're local artists, and many of them are also part of this history. So they enjoyed this whole experience, and they understand that it's all about preserving, protecting, and celebrating this great Black history.
And this Black history is part of the D.C. Renaissance. Now, the newcomers to the city, they've heard of the Harlem Renaissance, but D.C. had this Renaissance before.
Yeah, before Harlem. That's one of my taglines, is, the Black cultural renaissance before Harlem, which is really important. And that's another point I want to get out about this history and this story, was unlike Harlem, we actually owned the businesses. We always hear about the Cotton Club in New York, where our native son, Duke Ellington, who actually grew up in the U Street community, had his first professional paid gig at True Reformer Building. He actually, when he went to New York, although it was still a thriving hotspot, it's bigger, so they had more places, but it was not the same. We talking about the Howard Theater, where African Americans ran it. We went in the front door. We didn't sit in the balcony.
Right.
We owned our own businesses. This wasn't the case in Harlem. And then that Harlem Renaissance period, it's documented as starting as 1919 and ended in 1935. Well, we were just getting started here, and that's probably around the time that U Street was known as Black Broadway, when Pearl Bailey coined the phrase.
And it's, I think most people don't realize how much history is along that corridor, and in D.C. itself, with the number of people that Blacks that reached the middle class. What was the most surprising thing for you in researching this project? Of course, you knew a lot having grown up here, but what was surprising to you?
Well, one of the key benchmarks for me was that the fact that by 1920, the U Street quarter had 300 Black-owned businesses. 1920. We're talking an amazing
300?
300,
That's amazing.
And we had places like Murray Printing Brothers, and they were printing their own newspapers. We had, 8 to 10 Black-owned newspapers right here in D.C. Of course, we had the Afro-American, but then there were other ones, the Washington Bee, the Colored American. There were several other prominent publications that existed in this community, once again, that we were printing with our own resources and distributing to our community. And then another prominent fact that I think people really don't know about is that Carter G. Woodson lived in this community, the father of Black history. He started this movement right on 9th Street along, the greater historic U Street quarter, which they refer to as Shaw now. But
and
back
that house is still there.
His house is still there, 1538 9th Street. and so when I go back and read the history, it's all tied in. When I read about folks like Charles Hamilton Houston, who mentored Thurgood Marshall, he grew up in this community. They were planning the civil rights movement at the Y on 12th Street,
You're a walking history book.
Well, it's amazing because, again, this story is undertold, and
but you're telling it.
I'm trying.
Hold on, there's lots more to tell.
Okay. That's
more on the history, pride, and culture of Black Broadway and you when Washington Full Circle returns. Welcome back to Washington Full Circle. D.C.'s famed U Street was not only the place to see and be seen, it was once the cultural and intellectual hub of Black America. It's all in Chalet Hainsworth's living history on Black Broadway on U. Now, Chalet, of course, you brought some pictures that we want to talk about.
Yes.
Tell us about this one on the stand here, first of all.
This is Republic Gardens, okay, in the 1940s. This is my childhood friend's mom, who actually raised me, Lillian Jordan at the time, later known as Lillian Mines, and her sister. And they're at Republic Gardens, which
stayed around for a
long time. Yes, it was a major venue back in the day, in the age of Black Broadway, when you had entertainers like Louis Armstrong, Charlie Parker, Ella Fitzgerald, so all the greats.
My mom went to Republic Gardens back in the day. Yeah,
and we're in danger of losing it, to a condo building. So hopefully, that's something I'd like to try to save, because it's actually the oldest club. Bohemian is a jazz, it's a different type of venue.
Right.
But that Republic Gardens is the oldest club that remains, because there were tons of them, of course, that are no longer there.
I want to say one thing, looking at this photo, and I noticed from the documentary, is how well dressed everyone was. And I think I heard someone say that back then, you had to be dressed up to come to U Street.
Their other phrase was, when being there meant being somebody,
All
So
right.
you didn't go up on U Street, as my grandmother said, looking any kind of way, because I feature her. She's 95 in the project. And it was a lot of pride and power, because it was that era, where we had to sort of overcome a lot of obstacles. So it was about presentation was important, because otherwise, we had to overcome the perception of us, which again, we're still fighting, these same, cultural challenges and obstacles, really.
What was interesting is that you read about that period and about our parents and our grandparents, is that even if you were a bricklayer or a social worker or a banker, you dressed well. No one knew what you did during the day when you went out in the evening, because you looked just as great as everyone else.
And they all hung out together, again, which is a different, it's different. So just imagine being in some of these clubs, Republic Gardens, that's owned by us, and you're actually having an opportunity to communicate, or you personally know Louis Armstrong, or, even a lot of the sports, top sports athletes of that time. Jackie Robinson, he often frequented Black Broadway. Joe Louis. In fact, I've interviewed a woman's daughter. She used to own Cecilia's, which was a prominent club that started at 12th and U, and then eventually moved next to the Howard Theater. Joe Louis was the best man at her mom's wedding.
Really?
So this was a spot, and we owned it. We provided our own entertainment. We built our own venues. It was happening. Our bank. Let me not forget Industrial Bank, which is a major accomplishment. It opened, the heart of the Great Depression, because there was another bank there, Industrial Savings, and so when the Great Depression hit, Franklin Roosevelt had, shut down all the banks. And unfortunately, Industrial Savings Bank wasn't granted the permission to reopen. And so Jesse Mitchell and some other African-American business owners and the community got together, and they paid for stock to open the bank up, and they opened up August 20th, 1934. So they're celebrating their 82nd anniversary this year. And again, this was done by us,
Well, tell us about, you have another photo of a family member?
Yeah, so this is another one, because this is my maternal grandmother, who landed in the community in July of 1932, and they moved to 9th and Westminster. And so this is my grandmother. She's featured in the project. She's 95, Lucille Dawson. And
Miss Lucille
Dawson, and she's one of the ones that will tell you, that you had to look, and she still is like that today at 95. And these are her parents. And so they moved into 936 Westminster in July of 1932. My grandmother's older brother was already here, Clarence Norris. And so when they left Louisiana, they moved here. And however, my grandfather, he's from this community. He was actually born at 24th and M, and then he grew up on Q Street and went to Cardozo High School.
Yeah.
And my grandmother went to Armstrong as well. So that's them. And then the other one here is because the churches played a prominent role in the community at that time. And this is from early 1940s. This is my great-grandmother who you saw in the other picture.
Right.
She was on the deacon board. And so I love this picture because this is the original frame from the 1940s. She put this on here, but she wrote on here, me. So we wouldn't forget, and Francis Norris.
Everybody's parents did that. They wrote on the picture me and the name.
Yes.
Well, what's this little yarn on
I'm
here?
not sure why Granny I called her Granny, of course, why she put this on here, but I won't take it off.
Right.
This is the original frame.
The original frame.
Because, they don't make things like this anymore. So it's still hanging. We're talking almost 70 years later. This frame is still going strong.
Amazing, amazing.
So, yes.
So it's, through you, it's still a living, breathing project.
My goal is to inspire others, because I think it's a real social issue for African Americans is that we don't know our history, many of us. And, for some of our parents, it's painful to talk about. And so I'm hoping that also by documenting this history, creating this living digital history book, which is our website, blackbroadwayonyou.com, I have to get that in, that it will inspire others, and it's done that. So this picture here, my childhood friend, when I started on this journey, she said, oh my God, I have pictures, and then I have several, friends, my own family, so it's inspired them.
We've got to have you back. So many more stories to tell.
Yes.
Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for this opportunity.
That's it for Washington Full Circle. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again next time.